This week on Christian World News, a decade ago, political change was sweeping through the Middle East. How did it affect Christians and other religious minorities? Some face more pressure than ever, while others are seeing glimpses of freedom. Plus, Iran's silent revolution. Millions are turning away from the Islamic regime and their traditional faith. Many are turning to Jesus Christ. Hello everyone, welcome to this week's edition of Christian World News. I'm George Thomas. Today we have a special look at the church in the Middle East. 10 years ago, the Arab Spring was rocking the Middle East and North Africa. But today, is life different for Christians and other minorities? Senior Washington correspondent Jennifer Wishon takes a look.
There's no question the Arab Spring ushered in some bright spots, but it also created a deadly vacuum for Christians and other minorities. From Tunisia to Egypt to Syria, Americans watched with hopeful eyes as fed-up citizens protested oppressive governments.
What we saw was people, tired of corruption, people of limited rights, limited opportunity, economic deprivation. So they took to the streets, but freedom was a major component of that.
The protests sparked new debates over religious freedom. A number of countries rewrote their constitutions, but most of their brutal laws remained.
In Egypt, we've seen Shias, Quranists, Christians prosecuted under blasphemy laws.
And today, while Egypt is allowing the construction of churches, Saudi Arabia is revising its textbooks, and Sudan has repealed its apostasy law, the Arab Spring ushered in a terrifying era for Christians.
In 2014, ISIS fighters massacred a group of 21 Coptic Christian expatriate workers on a beach in Libya, broadcasting the horrific footage for all to see.
ISIS launched a genocidal campaign against Yazidis, Christians, and Shia Muslims in Iraq as the government turned a blind eye. Violence against Coptic Christians in Egypt intensified. And across the region, blasphemy laws actually expanded, criminalizing the worship of minorities. At a recent hearing, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom discussed how America can encourage meaningful change. Panelists suggested imposing sanctions on persecutors, tying strings to the billions of tax dollars the region gets in U.S. assistance, and having U.S. officials meet with opposition leaders, along with heads of state, to highlight the importance of diversity. Bashir says privately, countries often acknowledge the benefits of religious freedom, but maintain the status quo to appease extremists.
At some point, you have to move it forward and isolate those fringe elements who are making those threats. And move forward, come into this 21st century.
Religious freedom advocates agree the Trump administration raised the profile of international religious freedom. Now they're anxious to see President Biden's take on this important tenet of American diplomacy. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Joining me now is Rita El-Munayr. She's CEO of Sat7, a Christian broadcasting ministry to the Middle East. Rita, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. You recently said that this is God's season for the Middle East and North Africa. What did you mean by that?
It's the new generation that are growing up to have big questions. Yes, with all the hopelessness that they live, with all the insecurities, they're having the questions about what is next. And I believe with the Christian television, with the programs that aiming to the new generation, because the Middle East and North Africa is a young generation, almost 60% under the age of 25. So if we give this new generation the hope that is in Jesus Christ, if we give this new generation the faith, the forgiveness, the reconciliation that is in the Word of God, I think we win the Middle East today.
The pandemic shut down nations and took millions of lives. Yet during this time, Sat7 ministry has seen some extraordinary responses in this part of the world. Tell us briefly what's happening.
It was a great year for people or for us as management to think and strategize. And in 2020, we hired 3 people for main positions in Sat7, and they are young. And these 3 people helped in video on demand. So we launched our Sat7 Plus app for video on demand. So you can go binge watching all kinds of programs in Turkish, Arabic, and Farsi, of course, Christian programs. We strengthen our presence on social media with 10 brands. And also we hired an audience relation manager who's the one who started the counseling online just to be there for people and telling them that you are not alone.
To that point, talk about the responses you have seen from the countries. What specific countries have you seen the greatest engagement, for example?
The greatest engagements are from Iran. I mean, even though the numbers are not like very huge, like the Arab world, because Arab world 22 countries, and then you have one country, Iran. But the quality of engagement and stories that we hear from Iran is just fantastic. I'll tell you like one example. There's one lady writing to us said, I'm Christian. I become Christian because of your programs, because of course she is a Muslim, and I love Jesus Christ. But I don't know anywhere to go, not a church. I don't know a pastor. I'm in Tehran alone and isolated. But when you pray on the screen, I pray on the screen with you. When you worship on the screen, I worship on the screen with you. You become a church in my home. And one day I pray that I will see you in person to pray and worship with you. And this day, my friend, when I see you, I will bow down and wash your feet and tell you thank you for what you're doing to the isolated church, isolated Christians in Iran.
How important is this media revolution in bringing the powerful message of Jesus Christ?
You are there in the homes of people, even though you're not invited. So you're there on satellite broadcasting, and this is what to do primary, what Sat7 do primary. And also we are on the video on demand. We are on all devices, the iOS and the Android. We are on Apple TV also, and then they can watch programs that have a goal, programs that can tell them more about the love of Jesus Christ, programs that can give them the hope that we don't see in this hopeless Middle East.
How can believers pray for and participate in helping preach the gospel to this very strategic part of the world?
Please visit our website, www.sat7usa.org. Or if one day God will open a door, come and visit us. You will fall in love with the people in the Middle East. We have studios in Turkey, we have a studio in Cyprus, we have a studio in Lebanon, we have a studio in Egypt, in the UK. Come and meet the people. And also pray that the Lord will open more doors for us. We are now broadcasting also from the churches, the underground churches in North Africa, Tunisia, Algeria. And we want to reach more people with the love of Christ, this love that is the only hope for us in the Middle East and North Africa.
Rita El-Munir, thank you so much for coming on the broadcast.
Thank you.
Up next, in Iran, people are disgusted with the Islamic regime and millions are turning away from Islam. Some are finding new faith in Jesus Christ. We'll have that exciting report in a moment. In the Islamic Republic of Iran, a growing number of people are turning to Christ even in the face of persecution. Not too long ago, a historic survey uncovered a seismic shift happening inside the country. Take a look. Two Dutch professors interviewed more than 50,000 Iranians online for an unprecedented survey covering topics from faith to politics to religious life. The authors say they discovered a huge shift that should fundamentally change how we look at Iran today. One major standout from Professors Poiman Tamina Arab and Ammar Maliki is that despite Iran's census claims that 99.5% of the population is Shiite Islam, only 32% of their respondents identified as such. The next largest group are the nones at 22%, which led the authors to conclude that Iranians are abandoning religion for secularism.
Broadly speaking, this survey is important because it puts data behind the largely non-empirical argument that analysts have been forced to deal with, which is that Iranian society is less religious. This survey, this data proves that Iranian society is exceptionally less religious.
Approximately half of the population reported losing their religion. 60% said they do not pray anymore. Younger people reported higher levels of dissatisfaction with religion, and an overwhelming number of respondents were critical of authorities using strict Islamic laws to govern daily life. For example, 72% of those surveyed opposed the law mandating all women to wear a hijab, the Islamic veil covering. And when the authors dug a little deeper on questions central to that faith, even less numbers believed in the core tenets of Shia Islam. Only 37% believed in life after death. 30% believed in heaven and hell. An even lower number, 25%, believed in the coming of their Islamic savior known as the Mahdi or 12th Imam.
All of these trends, the pushback on the hijab, the lack of belief in the coming of the Mahdi, the lack of a willingness to identify with Shiism, the willingness to identify with other faiths, are all a result of politics in the past 40 years of the Iranian government. And as the Islamic Republic has tried to shove religion down the throat of Iranians to mask their authoritarian grasp on power, you've seen Iranians contest their authoritarianism by contesting faith itself.
The survey also revealed that as Islam diminishes, Christianity is growing. 1.5% of those surveyed identified themselves as Christian.
And that is compared to about 30 years ago being less than 1%. That less than 1%, everybody thought it was less than 0.5%.
Mike Ansari of Mohabbat TV, a ministry that broadcasts the gospel into Iran, tells CBN News the survey is significant because it lends credence to what mission groups have been saying for years.
This data is important because it's indicative of the fact that in the country of Iran, in the midst of persecution and Islamic rule, Iranians are turning their back to their faith, to their institutional faith, and receiving Christianity as a new faith.
Iran is one of the most dangerous places for Christians and other minority faith groups. Non-Muslims are often arrested or severely tortured for sharing or practicing their faith. Yet, in a sign of changing times, the survey found that 41% of respondents believed all religions should have the right to public proselytizing, and around 54% said it was a good idea for their children to learn about other faiths in school. You know, when it comes to religious freedom, there is no question Saudi Arabia has a very long way to go. But it's also true that few countries can boast the type of change happening in the kingdom today. Once again, here's Jennifer Wishan.
Christmas trees, even talk of a future Christian church? No, this isn't a fantasy. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is making and considering changes once thought impossible.
The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is incrementally moving in the right direction.
Johnny Moore, who sits on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, never thought religious liberty in Saudi Arabia was possible. Now he thinks it's inevitable. It's still illegal for Christians to worship publicly, but in recent years, the kingdom's religious police have eased off raiding worship services.
I would love one day, to celebrate Christmas on the Arabian Peninsula. And this year, by the way, they allowed Christmas trees, in the kingdom. And increasingly, the rumors that Saudi Arabia might actually consider having a Christian church, in the kingdom in some capacity. At this point, these are all rumors. But the very fact that they are rumors is significant.
Especially in light of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's aim to reform the kingdom's judicial system, Sharia law based on a strict interpretation of the Quran, one that's not tolerant of other faiths. Is this a pretty big deal?
For the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to say, no, we're going to have laws like the rest of the world, and we're going to put those laws down on paper. I mean, this is an astonishing reform.
Watchdog groups also point to improvements in the kingdom's school textbooks, removing some hateful references to Jews, Christians, and others.
Increasingly, we're seeing strong leadership throughout the Arab world that is pushing back on extremism and saying it's not enough to stop the extremist. The real way of stopping extremism is raising a generation that doesn't have to fear those who worship differently.
Incremental moves that may one day lead to Muslims, Christians, and Jews coexisting on the Arabian Peninsula. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.